Assalamu alaikum everyone, Exhibition Cadet Sabir Shah for my channel Aviation Cadet 9936 here. The unfortunate flight Air India 171's preliminary report has come out, and with everyone's everyone predicted the other way and the report came out the other way. I think I was the only one who did predict in the right way and pointing the fingers towards the right direction. No one else. People were busy in getting the probability of 1 out of 100 billion becoming true. Vapor lock theory would never happen in jet engines and stuff like that, but I stuck to my theory from day one when I presented my first theory on June 19th, that it was because of the inexperienced pilot in the cockpit, and accidentally he did it. Now, I'm not blaming the pilot. I would in the later part of the video, I would still defend those pilots because the report is very vague and definitely it's not showing the full picture of what has happened. But I will not go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 indices. I will just go to number 12, accident flight. So I will read that one out. Stay with me and listen to my point of view, because I was the closest one who came up with this theory of fuel switch controls to off position. On 12 June 2025, Air India's B787-8 aircraft bearing registration Victor Tango Alpha November Bravo arrived at Ahmedabad Airport operating flight AI 423 from New Delhi. The aircraft touched down from at 5:47 UTC, which is 11:17 Indian Standard Time, and was parked at the Bay 34. Now, you remember the video circulating, the guy who traveled that one, and he mentioned a few problems, and this flight was late for about 38 minutes. And the second paragraph mentions that the crew of the previous flight A1423 had made pilot defect report PDR entry for status message stab POS XTCR in the tech log. The troubleshooting was carried out as per FIM by Air India on duty AME, and the aircraft was released to flight at 6:40 UTC. So it was scheduled at 1:10 initially, but it took off at 1:38. So about 40 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes of delay. And the aircraft was scheduled to operate flight AI-171 from Ahmedabad to Gatwick with ETD 740 UTC, and that's 1310 IST. The flight was to be operated by the flight crew comprising an ATPL holder PIC as a CPL holder co-pilot along with the 10 cabin crew. Both pilots were based at Mumbai and had arrived at Ahmedabad on the previous day. They had a decade rest prior to operating the said flight. The co-pilot was pilot flying, and the PIC was pilot monitoring. So the junior pilot, he was the pilot flying, so he performed the takeoff. The crew of flight AI-171 arrived at the airport and underwent pre-flight breath analyzer test at 6:25 UTC and were found fit to cooperate the flight. The crew is seen arriving at the boarding gate in the CCTV recording at about 7:05 UTC, 12:35 Indian Standard Time. There were 230 passengers on board, out of which 15 were in business class and 215 passengers were in economy class, including 2 infants. My heart goes out to them. Fuel on board was 54 tons, and as per the load and trim sheet of the flight, keep in mind that one, the takeoff weight was that's 213 tons, which I predicted through Jeffrey Thomas and Richard that it was more than 195 tons, but couldn't be less than 195 tons. This shows that the second thing becomes true, that it was 213 because of the takeoff roll and the runway length So it must have been above 195. Could be more than that because this is what they told. But what about the hand carries people were carrying on their hands? No one knows. The takeoff weight was within allowable limits for the given conditions. Well, debatable. There was no dangerous goods on the aircraft. Okay, definitely. The calculated V speed with available conditions to take off were V1 was at 153 degrees, where this is point of no return, where you have to perform the takeoff. VR was 155 knots, so as soon as you reach V1, definitely within 1 second you will reach to rotational velocity, which is 155 knots, and then V2 is 162 knots when you start to climb up. So the ASMGCS replay of the flight was also carried out after the accident. The aircraft was observed departing from the Bay 34 at 7:48. That's 1:48 Indian Standard Time in the afternoon. The taxi clearance was received at 7:55 UTC, and the aircraft taxied out of from the bay at 7:56 UTC. The aircraft taxied to runway 23 via taxi R4, backtracked and lined up. So it went all the way to runway 23, backtracked and lined up right away. A takeoff clearance was issued at 8:07:33 UTC. The aircraft started rolling at 8:07:37 UTC. So now these times are very critical because we will predict the speeds, the V1, V2, and VR, but not in this video, in the later videos. As per the EAFR data, the aircraft crossed the takeoff decision speed V1 and achieved 153 knots IAS at 8:08:33. So the takeoff roll was initiated at 7 minutes and 37 seconds, and it achieved V1 at 8 minutes and 35 seconds. So it took 58 seconds for the aircraft to run, 58 seconds. And then the aircraft sensor transitioned to air mode consistent with liftoff at 8:08:39. So that means that after 4 seconds, once the rotational action was applied, the aircraft was airborne. The aircraft achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 IAS indicated airspeed at about 8:08:42, that's the seconds. So that means once it lifted off, after 3 seconds, it went up to 180 knots. And immediately thereafter, the engine 1 and engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transitioned from run to cutoff position. Okay, so that happened at 42. So at 42, one of the pilots went to the fuel cutoff switches, and one by one, keep the time, because you can't do it simultaneously because you need 3 fingers, lift it off and then put it in. So that's about 3 seconds, so it should go to 45 seconds. Okay, with a time gap of 1 second. So now I'm the pilot non-flying, so that should be the captain, because the pilot flying has his hands, both hands on the control column, and a yoke, the stick, and probably one hand on the throttle full. And non-flying pilot, the pilot monitoring, is just sitting and viewing. So this has to be done by the pilot flying according to SOPs. Whatever he was trying to do, he has to do it. And the engine N1 and N2 began to decrease from their takeoff values as the fuel supply to the engine was cut off. Okay. In the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, why did he cut off? The other pilot responded that he did not do so. Now this line is gonna be played over and over again for next whole year until the final report comes out. So one observed that the fuel supply was cut off, and the other refused that he did it. So now people are gonna go and say, oh, maybe the FedEx failure, and it switched. But the FedEx is a software system. It cannot manually change the location of the switches, and these switches are not the toggle switches that you put finger down and it goes up and you put the finger on top. No, it has to be manually taken out and then put on one of the positions. So FedEx cannot do that. None of these software systems can change the hardware settings For example, your throttle is a hardware, it has a full position. What it could do in terms of failure, that it is showing full throttle, but actually the power is not supplying. That could have happened. But here, let's move on. I'm just reading the main part. The CCTV footage obtained from the airport showed ram air turbine getting deployed during the initial climb immediately after liftoff. There we go. Immediately after liftoff, they waited for 4 seconds, and then the fuel cutoff switches were turned off. Now, the SOP of Boeing 787-8 is not telling you to do these steps in this order. It's, you take off, no matter what engines have been failed, you have to go up to a safe height for about 600 feet above ground level to around 1,000 feet above when you push the autopilot on. And this has been deployed before that, right after liftoff. And rats were, so it's not saying that were they manually deployed or they deployed automatically. So we don't know about that one. Boeing 787-8 would never deploy the rat below 4,000 AGL despite dual engine failure. That's in the manual of the Boeing 787-8. So it must have been deployed by the pilots. And why would they do that? Because the SOP of this airplane upon engine failures says that you get the throttles to idle, you turn on the rat, the fuel switch turn off, throttles to idle, and push the RAT. That's the order. But here RAT was deployed first, so doesn't make any sense. The CCTV footage obtained from the airport showed RAT getting deployed during the initial climb immediately after liftoff. So this is going to be interesting. The time of the CCTV footage should have been given, but I'm sure it's not given. We're here. No significant bird activity is observed from the, of course, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and it's 41 degrees. You think that those birds are stupid to go out and stay and try for looking for the worms, and worms in this heat, they don't want to be pop worms. The aircraft started to lose altitude before crossing the airport perimeter wall. Okay, they have a footage. As per the EAFR data, both engines N2 value passed below minimum idle speed, and the rat hydraulic pump began supplying hydraulic power at about 80847. So that's basically 5 seconds after the switches were turned off. Now, rat takes about 30 seconds to supply the power, and here it takes 5 seconds to supply the power. Mathematical error, I'm sure. As per the EAFR, the engine 1 fuel cutoff switch transitioned from cutoff to run at about 80852 UTC. So at 42, the engine 1, probably the right engine, they turn it off. 10 seconds later, they got it up again. So during that time, what they were doing, we don't know. The APU inlet door began opening at about 80854 UTC. Consistent with the APU auto start. The APU takes 30 seconds to start. Not the RAT. So take that words back. Thereafter, at 80856 UTC, the engine 2 fuel cutoff switch was also turned on. So see, it takes 4 seconds to perform the actions on these switches. So this is very clear, right? So let's say in the beginning, he took the switch and put it on the off position, and then the second one, he did the same thing. So human instinct, 4 seconds. And once he was turning them back again in one by one, right, it took him 4 seconds. When fuel control switches were moved to cut off to run while the aircraft is in flight, each engine's full authority dual engine control, FEDEC, automatically manages a relight and thrust recovery sequence of ignition and fuel introduction. Yes, it takes about 40 to 90 seconds for FEDEC to auto restart the engines. The EGT was observed to be rising for both engines, indicating relight engines. Once core deceleration stopped, reverse and started to progress to recovery. Engine 2 was able to relight but could not arrest core speed deceleration and reintroduce fuel rapidity to increase core speed acceleration and recovery. The EAFR recording stopped at 8:09:11 UTC. So they took off at 8:42. Liftoff. 8th minute and 42nd second. And 18 plus 11. 39 seconds it took from liftoff to where the recording got stopped into the crash. And at 8:09:05, now that's 6 seconds before the crash, one of the pilots transmitted Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Now they didn't say anything else, it's just Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. So if you say these three words in a tongue twister speed, Mayday, 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 I took 1 second, right? And now reporting the incident, that thrust not achieved, going down, it would take you a few more seconds. So that's when, in the last moments, they made out this call. So these timings are very important because that's where we're going to catch the Air India for giving this bullshit report, blaming pilots. The ATCO inquired about the call sign. ATCO did not get any response but observed the aircraft crashing outside the airport boundary and activated the emergency response. Okay, at 8:14:44 UTC crash fire. Okay, now rest is the progress of investigation. So this is it. They put the blame on pilots totally, and the thing which they cannot catch up with is the glide ratio of this aircraft. If it was at 180 knots and dirty configuration, rack deployed, flaps 5%, and all the gears down, the aircraft could not have traveled 1,700 kilometers or 0.9 nautical miles from the airport, from the liftoff place. Impossible, because this is against the Boeing's manual even. With dirty configuration, the aircraft glides at 3.1 to 1 ratio. And this plane went for 1,700 meters, 1.7 kilometers, 0.9 nautical miles. Where did that thrust come from? It's a cover-up. It's bullshit. For now, that's all. See you next time.